What a lovely day for a podcast. I feel like everyone's been making that joke. Actually, ever since the movie came out, everyone's just saying, "What a lovely day."
I like the one. I like the one that I sent you earlier. Is that if I'm gonna podcast, I'm gonna podcast historically on the Fury Road. I like that one. I like that quote from the movie a lot.
So today we're talking about Poltergeist.
Oh,
Not really. Mad Max Fury Road today. Nick and Joe here talking about that new Mad Max movie everyone's been raving about. We'll see if we think the same as about 98% of everyone else out there, according to Rotten Tomatoes.
I think it's safe to say we do.
Yeah, spoiler alert, we do.
Yeah.
As usual, if you want to skip around to any part of the conversation, the index in the description, you just click on whatever time frame you want, and you can skip ahead to that. You can find more episodes of Outside the Letterbox on our website, the-letterbox.com. Drop us a comment if you like this. Drop us a comment if you hated this. We don't care. We're going to keep doing it anyway, so just rave away, whatever. You can also subscribe to us on our homepage or follow us on Twitter at Letterboxers and stay up to date with us on Facebook at The Letterbox. I think if you search that, it should come up, hopefully. And then for today, we're actually going to skip our recently watched section and dive straight into movie news before you talk about Mad Max Fury Road.
Yeah, because pretty much this whole week, I just watched Mad Max movies. I watched Mad Max 1. I watched The Road Warrior. I watched Beyond Thunderdome. I saw Fury Road. Then I saw Fury Road again. So,
And to be honest, we have a lot to talk about with Fury Road anyway.
Yeah, I think we do. So, I think that time would be best spent just talking about that. And plus, yeah, I was rewatching all the Mad Max movies. I'm sure we're going to talk about them when we start our conversation anyway. Because I think even though it's not important to have seen the other movies before you see Fury Road, I think for the purposes of our conversation, it's probably best if we give a little context of our experiences with those movies.
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds great to me. All right, so I guess diving straight into it, just a couple of movie news that came out this past week. We got our first trailer for that Steve Jobs movie where Ashton Kutcher is not playing Steve Jobs.
Michael
Fassbender.
Yeah, which it's funny because they released a photo a couple months ago, and people were complaining that he didn't look like Steve Jobs. But I thought they did a pretty good job in this trailer of, making him kind of look like him, which obviously, that's not the most important part. The most important part is if Michael Fassbender gives a good performance, but from this trailer, it looks like he's at least going to have that look.
Yeah, well, that was the main thing I was thinking about while watching this trailer, was that when they finally revealed his face, it didn't naturally come to me as like, oh yeah, that's Steve Jobs. I had to kind of think in my head, like, all right, how does he look like Steve Jobs, and can I make him fit that? I still think if you're going for looks, obviously there are many better choices you could have gone with. The performance is what's really going to matter here. We haven't really gotten a huge taste of that so far. So I'm cautious, but Michael Fassbender is a great actor.
Yeah, and this was, this trailer was the definition of a teaser trailer. And, we got a couple glimpses of Kate Winslet, Seth Rogen, Jeff Daniels, like all these great people who are going to be in the movie. And so I think more than anything, it was kind of like, hey, this movie that we were having such a hard time getting made last year, it's coming out. These are the people who are making it, Danny Boyle, Aaron Sorkin, these are the people in it. And come see it when it comes out, and I think it was enough to get me properly excited for it, without having a whole lot to go on.
Yeah, I'm certainly more interested in this one than the previous one.
Yeah, I still haven't seen the previous one, even though I think it's on Netflix. But the general consensus I hear from that one is that Ashton Kutcher's good, everything else isn't.
Yeah, well, I'll have to get around to that one sometime. Maybe on our next recent watches. We also got some new Hateful Eight pictures from the set. Finally,
these are so good.
I'm genuinely excited for this movie.
Yeah, I'm in the bag already. Like you say, Quentin Tarantino, I'm there. You say Quentin Tarantino Western, I'm there the night before, waiting in line. I love this man's his work, and he's always even though he made Django Unchained, and that was a Western, it was more of a a tweak kind of on the Western because it took place in the South, focused on slavery, like all these things that aren't he basically took Western conventions and applied them to something that doesn't normally have them. Whereas this time around, even though it's still not an entirely conventional Western because it's a single setting and all that kind of great stuff, it's closer to a classic Western than Django is. So I'm excited to see how it's different and how it's similar to what he's done before.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the thing is that I've never thought of myself as the biggest Quentin Tarantino fan. To be perfectly honest, I mean, I like his movies just fine. There are very few of them that I can get genuinely excited for. I love Reservoir Dogs. Inglourious Bastards, I think, is great. I don't know. I love his style, but I've just never been his biggest fan for some reason. I don't really have anything against his movies either. It's not 100% my thing, but I do really respect the guy. I really respect what he can do with the camera. And I think this movie has the potential to be the sort of thing that I am really into more than some of his more recent stuff. Even more than Django Unchained. I don't know. Maybe it's because Bruce Dern is in this. I freaking love Bruce Dern.
Yeah. When you said you're a big fan of Reservoir Dogs, and this movie is basically a Western version of Reservoir Dogs to an extent, just like all this group of bad people in the same room having to hash out their problems and whatnot, and most of them will probably die in the end. I think it's pretty safe to assume that.
Yeah, and I love the look, like the whole fur covered snow and everything like that. It looks really, really visually interesting.
Yeah, and another thing too is like how colorful it looks. Like if you look at like Michael Madsen's outfit, he plays like a cow puncher, which is Western slang for, I guess, just like a ranch hand. But he's wearing like this blue outfit and whatever, and that's a whole thing that I kind of love about Tarantino is we kind of always assume that his movies are gritty and bloody and violent and whatever, and yet they're also really colorful. They're really kind of fun and funny and everything. And I think these pictures kind of display it too. Like there's that great one of Kurt Russell and Jennifer Jason Leigh singing, and Bruce Dern is like covering his ears like he can't stand their singing or whatever. It's just like, that's kind of what I want out of this movie. I want characters to be butting heads, but I also want, just those great, little character moments of, these two people are going to be singing in the corner. This person's going to be mad at them. And then, this guy's going to be over here drinking his coffee and whatever. And, I just think it'll be a really interesting movie. It's one of my most anticipated of the year. So.
And Nick, dude, Kurt Russell is in a Quentin Tarantino movie.
For a second time.
Well, yeah, but Death Proof doesn't really count.
What? Why wouldn't it count? Why wouldn't it count?
It's
okay. That's not top tier.
It's part of a double feature.
I know, but in like 90% of the world, it was released as his own movie and not as Grindhouse. So
it's part of a double feature. It's part of a double feature, and nobody really watched it. So this is the first real Tarantino movie he's gonna be in.
I watched it.
I love Death Proof. I think Death Proof is great, but nobody saw it.
I will say that the facial hair in these photos is incredible. From
oh my gosh,
Kurt Russell to Sam Jackson to Tim Roth to it's all good.
It's so many giant mustaches. It's awesome. And then final little bit of news we have is the Marvel Civil War cast and synopsis has been revealed.
Marvel actually. It's funny you call it Marvel Civil War when it really should be Captain America.
Captain America. I was just reading off the topics.
Yeah. Although it feels like
it is though.
When you look at the cast, though, it's basically Avengers 2.5. And
oh my gosh, so many people in this movie. Why isn't it just Avengers 2?
I know.
Or whatever.
Probably the three biggest revelations. I mean, I think is like everyone knew. Obviously, Cap's going to be in it, and like Hawkeye will be in it. Scarlet Witch will be in it, and Black Widow and all those people. But I think the three big casting things that kind of came out this week is that Paul Rudd as Ant-Man will be in it, which is cool that he's going to be in another movie so soon after Ant-Man comes out. Martin Freeman's been cast as a character that we don't know who, so that'll be interesting. That we have.
Maybe he's playing Black Panther.
But it's funny that now we have Martin Freeman and Benedict Cumberbatch in three different franchises together. We have them in Sherlock, we have them in the Hobbit movies, and now we have them in the Marvel universe. And if Martin Freeman's character doesn't meet Doctor Strange at some point, I'm sure there will be millions of fanboys and fangirls out there very disappointed. But the most surprising and probably my favorite casting announcement was that William Hurt as General Thunderbolt Ross is going to be in it, and he was originally in the Edward Norton Incredible Hulk movie. And I think the main reason we're all kind of surprised is because that movie's relationship to the rest of the Marvel Cinematic Universe has kind of been uh, ignored, for lack of a better word, because like they acknowledge that, like, oh yeah, that stuff happened. Like in Avengers, I think they mentioned, Hulk is like, oh, the last time I was in New York, I made a mess of it. And yet, obviously Mark Ruffalo replaced Edward Norton as the Hulk, and none of those characters have appeared since then. So it's interesting that, oh, this is our first like real connection back to the Incredible Hulk movie. So I'm just curious what his role will be, especially since the Hulk isn't in this movie. So I'm very curious to see how it pans out.
I'm just happy that they're. I want to say that they're acknowledging that the Incredible Hulk exists, but I mean, like, it always has existed. I think people forget that that one is technically part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I feel like people tend to dismiss it when talking about the films in general. But I mean,
I think it's because, like, even if you're not in an Iron Man movie, if it's like Avengers or Avengers 2, like, you acknowledge that, like, oh, Pepper exists, or like if it's not a Thor movie, Jane exists, or that Stellan Skarsgård's character will pop up or whatever. And the same thing with the Captain America. Like, there are different characters who will pop up and stuff that kind of reinforce, like, oh, these movies are connected. Whereas the only connection we really have to the Incredible Hulk movie so far has been the Hulk himself, and really that one doesn't feel as strong because it's a different actor,
yeah,
so you don't have that same, kind of through line. On paper, it's the same through line, but it doesn't feel that way because Mark Ruffalo is so different from Edward Norton.
exactly. And to be fair, I actually really enjoyed the Incredible Hulk, and I feel like a lot of people just they just kind of forget about it. And so I'm really happy that they're bringing elements of that one back in here because there was a lot of good things in that movie.
Yeah, I really liked it too, and I feel like the only reason it's at the bottom of my list of those Marvel movies is because it's not really connected to the rest of them, and so it feels so different that just by like that, it kind of has to go lower on the list because it doesn't feel like you can really easily compare it to Thor or Captain America.
Exactly. So it'll be interesting to see Thunderbolt Ross being brought back in. The one name that was absent from this Civil War cast list though was Spider-Man.
Oh yeah,
because they hadn't cast him yet at the time that they announced it. Although from what I understand, that's going to be
well, and they still technically haven't cast him either. It's pretty much assumed at this point that Asia Butterfield will play him. There hasn't been like a press release or anything. It's just been people saying like, yeah, he's Spider-Man. But I have a feeling he won't have a big part in the movie.
No,
especially
I don't think so.
Like, because the movie's been shooting for, I think it started shooting like the week Avengers 2 came out, so it's been shooting for like 2 weeks at this point. And so the fact that you haven't cast him yet either means that all his stuff they're waiting till the end of shooting for, or it's a small enough role that they really can wait till whenever, which I would be okay with, because there are plenty of characters in this movie, and that's kind of a complaint people are having, is that, oh, there's too many characters in this movie, and it's like, well, that's kind of a I guess on a certain level it's valid, but at the same time, like, every movie has like 20 different characters in it, and it's just how they're used. Like, a lot of these characters could pop up for a scene or two. Like, for all we know, Thunderbolt Ross, like, this movie's called Civil War, and we all kind of assume it's going to be about government control of superheroes and whatnot. And so for all we know, Thunderbolt Ross will like show up in a courtroom scene, give like a 30-second testimony, and then leave. It's entirely possible that it'll be more, cameos, or just like people like who have to kind of tangentially relate to it and have to be referenced. And so yeah, who knows? We'll have to wait until the movie kind of make a final judgment on that.
Can this movie please be Captain America: 12 Angry Superheroes?
Oh, that would be great.
It's just like a court movie, or even better, there's no superheroes in the whole movie. It's just the jury standing around judging the superheroes who are out in the courtroom.
There's a comic book series called, oh gosh, what's it called? I can't remember. I'll have to look it up later. But it's basically about all the people who have to clean up after the superheroes when they've destroyed everything, and it's a fun little read. I don't remember what it's called though, but it was pretty good.
That's awesome. So anyway, I think that about wraps up our movie news conversation. So let's dive into the Fury Road, the Furry Road.
Oh my gosh, between this and Fury, the tank movie that came out last year, I think we've had enough furry joke titles.
Furious 7.
Oh my gosh, no. Let's move on, Joe.
Okay, so we got like a list of things we want to talk about on this movie. I'm actually really excited for this conversation. I guess we'll just start with the just brief thoughts on the original first three movies. So Nick, you probably watched more of them more recently than I have. I've watched The Road Warrior more recently, but you went back and you rewatched all three of them, didn't you?
Yes, I did. Yeah, last week I started with Mad Max. A couple days later, did Road Warrior. A couple days later, did Beyond Thunderdome. And just kind of some context is I hadn't seen these movies until a couple years ago. I actually thought I think the first time I ever saw Mad Max was when you bought it. And then one of our other roommates in college had the Road Warrior, so I saw it then. I had never seen Beyond Thunderdome until like a year ago. But I think it's safe to say I'm a fan of the franchise. I think the weakest film, in my opinion, is actually the first Mad Max. And it's not that there's anything wrong with it. It's just that so much of what we've come to love and define Mad Max by happens in the Road Warrior. So, so Mad Max is only kind of a weaker movie in retrospect. Rewatching it again this time, I caught, I was more taken in by kind of some of the depth. There's more character stuff. There's a lot more talking in the first one. It's kind of the most traditional of all the movies. But at the same time, my problems with it are kind of the same, where it's kind of boring at times, it's not entirely exciting. It's a post-apocalyptic world that still has beach houses and, green backyards and nice rivers and stuff like that. So it's kind of one of those things where it's like, oh, this must be like either right before or right after whatever terrible thing happens. The Road Warrior, though, is exactly what you want. It's a great siege western type movie. And then Beyond Thunderdome, I know a lot of people don't like Beyond Thunderdome. I really like Beyond Thunderdome. I'm actually writing a in defensive article on it. And I think it does more for the franchise than a lot of people give it credit for, because it opens it up so much more. Because when you look at the Road Warrior, it doesn't really give you a sense of a larger world. It's kind of like, oh, here's Max walking in the desert, and then he bumps into a gyro captain, and then there's this settlement that's fighting with a gang. It's not like, oh, at the beginning of the movie, he's in this one town, leaves it, and then goes whatever, and you get a sense of, oh, there's a bigger world. Beyond Thunderdome, I think, is the first movie that's like, no, there's a huge post-apocalyptic world out there that's, full of stories to be told and different types of characters and whatnot. So I think, without Beyond Thunderdome, you can't really make a movie like Fury Road. So yeah, so I really like Beyond Thunderdome. It's not necessarily better than the Road Warrior, but I think it's the one that I might throw on to rewatch, because there's a lot of entertaining stuff about it, and also, for being allegedly the worst of the Mad Max movies, so many lines and pieces of imagery have gone on in pop culture that even people who don't know the Mad Max movies know. Like, the 2 men enter, 1 man leaves. Everyone knows that. Bust a deal, face the wheel, who runs bar. Like, it's like all these lines that I've heard people reference that haven't even seen the movie. And it's like, if this is the worst of the Mad Max movies, then it's, it's still left a pretty good cultural mark on society. So yeah, needless to say, I'm a pretty big Mad Max fan.
I think what you mean is that you're a pretty big Beyond Thunderdome fan.
Yeah, that's secretly what I was saying the whole
time. Okay, so I've been a fan of the series, a little bit longer than I think than you have. I pretty much love all the movies in this series for entirely different reasons. They're very, very different movies. Each film is its own unique sort of tone and feel, which is one of the great things about it, the Mad Max films. The first one is, like you said, a very, very, it's a slower, more contemplative movie. The world hasn't quite gone to shit yet. Well, I mean, like not totally yet. I like it more as almost like a almost like a Shakespearean kind of tragedy of sorts. It's really Mad Max Begins. It's an origin story for him.
Yeah.
um, and then the Road Warrior is really where it takes off as this action franchise. The Road Warrior is still my favorite of the original three. It's just such a fun movie. It's like a toned down version of Fury Road, as we'll get into our conversation of that one as that goes on. But it's really just kind of a nonstop action movie of sorts. But the thing that I love about the Road Warrior is that it has a lot of action. It has very little dialogue, actually. But the whole story is told through the actions of the characters. Alex and I did a Film Alerts episode on this recently where we talked a little bit about that, how just kind of every little thing that the characters do reveals something about their personality. Max doesn't say a whole lot in The Road Warrior, but you feel like you know his character really, really well, just because, you know, the way he eats dog food out of a can and just kind of one-liners he throws at people and just kind of little things he does, which is great. It's really, really good filmmaking when you can reveal so much about a character without them having to say a whole lot. And that even works even if you hadn't seen the first Mad Max movie and you don't know a whole lot about his past. You can see the Road Warrior just fine. Each film in this series is very disconnected from the other ones, and so you can watch them each without having seen the rest of them, which is another great thing about the franchise. You can pop in wherever you want, and it doesn't matter.
Yeah, that's what I like about it too. These movies feel closer to legends as opposed to, you know, serialized storytelling. Because with the exception of the first Mad Max movie, every other movie in the franchise kind of feels like someone else retelling a story about him. And it's kind of like, as long as you kind of know the basic idea that, you know, Mad Max used to be a cop, his family got killed, now he's a road warrior. Like, it's pretty much all you need to know. And it's kind of like, you know, that it's the same type of storytelling that goes into, you know, retelling of Robin Hood or King Arthur or whatever. Like, you know, the basic, you know, setup of the character or what they represent. And that's kind of all you need to know going into, you know, a new movie or a new telling or whatever. And, you know, you just kind of like, yeah, I like that these movies are kind of open in that regard. So there've been a lot of discussions online of people like, oh, I haven't seen the new movies. Do I have to see them before the new one? It's like, no, you don't, but you should, you know,
Yeah.
just because they're good movies. You don't have to, because, you know, this isn't like the Marvel stuff where, you know, some people think that you need to see all of them before you see the newest one, which sometimes is true, sometimes isn't, but, you know.
I've recently heard people using an analogy that I think is perfectly valid. What with Fury Road coming out and they recasting Mad Max's with Tom Hardy, is that I've been hearing people say that it's almost like the James Bond movies, where it's you don't need to have seen all the other James Bond movies to watch the newest James Bond movie. All you need to know is just like who, you know, bare minimum of who James Bond is. He's a Secret Service agent for England, and just take it out from there. Same thing with Mad Max. You can take this archetype of the character and put him into any scenario, and as long as you know the bare basics of him, you're good.
Yeah, he's kind of. I think Mad Max is the closest we've come to recreating the Man with No Name from the Dollars trilogy, because in those movies, like the character is never the cause of action. He kind of wanders into a situation and then has to deal with it. And this is kind of relating again to something we'll probably talk about more in regards to Fury Road, but in the Man with No Name trilogy, he's not even necessarily the main character. Like, I think Fistful of Dollars is maybe the only one where you could actually say, oh, he's the main character. But if you look at For a Few Dollars More, it's the Lee Van Cleef character who has the emotional connection to the plot of why he wants to kill the villain. And then in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, it's a Tuco show. And that's very true of the Mad Max movies at times, is that there will sometimes be another character who will have the spotlight, but it doesn't necessarily take away from who Mad Max is. In fact, if anything, it helps maintain the mystique of who he is as a character.
Exactly. So he's more of a legend than anything else.
Yeah, that's a perfect way of putting him. They're all just different legends of the same character.
Yeah. And then just briefly touching upon Beyond Thunderdome. Yes, it is my least favorite of the series. I still enjoy watching it, though. I I can't really say that it's a bad movie. I mean, like it's only saying that it's my least favorite of the Mad Max movies is almost like saying that you know what A Bug's Life or Cars is my least favorite Pixar movie or something like that. I still enjoy it a lot. I think it's great. I don't think there are any bad Pixar movies, but you gotta like some better than others. And it's the same thing with Mad Max.
That's fair.
Um, I think my main complaints with Beyond Thunderdome is all the stuff with the kids feels a lot like Hook. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of the movie Hook. It's just I don't know the whole kids and the food fights and all that kind of stuff. I don't know for some reason it just wasn't my thing. I felt a lot of that in Beyond Thunderdome. It is toned down though. Mel Gibson in playing Max is redemption in that, and I love all the Bartertown scenes. It is a very very fun movie still.
Yeah, I would say Beyond Thunderdome is the Return of the Jedi of the Mad Max films, and that like it was like mid '80s. It was when like creature design, everything was like really extravagant and whatever. So you get a lot of cool background stuff. Like Bartertown is basically like you could imagine it like you could walk into another room and you would like run into Jabba's palace or something like that. You know?
Yeah.
It's also the Return of the Jedi, the franchise, in that like, instead of Ewoks, as little kids. Instead of like, it's the kind of movie that like a lot of people like, it's not a bad movie, but it's the lesser of a bunch of really good movies. So a lot of people will generally harp on that one a lot.
But it's still worth your time. Still check it out. Absolutely. So moving on to Fury Road. Where do you want to start on this?
Oh my gosh! Well, I mean, I'm just gonna say in general that I love this movie. I've seen it twice in the span of 2 days. I'm already planning on seeing it a third time at the end of this week. A fourth time is not out of the question necessarily. And I think a huge part of that comes from this is just it's not a typical movie, because a typical movie, like you kind of there are characters and situations and whatever, and you kind of whatever, like the story has an effect on you, and you kind of leave the theater and you're like, oh, I like that, or I didn't like that. This though, it has all those things, but it relies so much on visual storytelling over narrative storytelling, and and there's the action and everything, that it kind of, when you come out of it, it feels more like when you come off a roller coaster. And I love roller coasters, and I rarely will go on a roller coaster just once. I will go on a roller coaster multiple times in a row on a single day at a theme park until either I throw up or just get numb from the excitement of it. And I feel like that's the way this movie is compared to something like Avengers or whatever. It's a completely different type of movie for me.
Yeah, it's a movie that it's very style over substance in a way, but that's not really being fair to the movie, because just like the Road Warrior, they fit so much into the story through the style. Basically, the whole time you're watching it, the everything in the plot is progressed through the action. There are entire action scenes where there are character arcs within the action scenes, but the action scenes themselves are just so visually enthralling. You just can't take your eyes off the screen. It's a 2-hour movie. It feels like a 1-hour movie. It's so much fun to watch. I really want to see it again. This is certainly one I'll be getting on Blu-ray when it comes out. It also reminds me of when Dredd came out a few years ago. Now this is a much better movie than Dredd, I think I'd say. Or I don't know. We'll get to that in a little bit. I have a few complaints about Fury Road, but they're very minor things. But it's just the fact that we have a largish budget, R-rated, visually enthralling action film based on a previous property that works really, really well. And you can tell it's made by people who absolutely love the source material. So in that way, I kind of feel like, again, like this movie is almost like the Dredd of this year, but it's much more mainstream than Dredd was, and it's more visually interesting as well. So, yeah, I loved it.
Oh, Patrick, can you hear me now?
Oh yeah, I can hear you now.
I think my microphone was muted for a second.
Oh,
but yeah, it's interesting you were talking about the mainstream part, because I had two different experiences in my two different showings, and I was at my hometown theater, so not a lot of not a lot of people there on a Sunday night or a Monday night when I went. But after the first screening, well, there was a guy who was obviously a hardcore Mad Max fan because he was cheering in the beginning, and then at the end of the movie, like people applauded and whatever. But then after the during the second screening, we had these two guys in front of us who looked like they would have been the most hardcore Mad Max fans ever. One of the guys I'm pretty sure was. The other guy, though, halfway through the movie, got up, left, went to go take a smoke break because he came back in and smelled like a cigarette. And then about 3/4 of the way through the movie was like, this movie's too weird, and then like walked out, but then walked back in. I don't know. It was weird. This is a very weird movie. I want to say this up front because we're raving about it. A lot of critics are raving about it, but it's a very weird movie.
Oh yeah.
In a way that, and like my definition of weird, like we don't really have time to go into it, but like there's different kinds of weird when you're talking about cinema. There's Terry Gilliam weird, there's Tim Burton weird, there's Gore Verbinski weird, there's George Miller, and depending on who it is, I can get into it in different levels. I can go further with one director than another depending on their type of weird. This is the kind of weird I can go full in on. There's so much just like grotesque imagery. There's so much like imagery that like feels out of place, but then when you think about it, makes sense. Like the new favorite character, the Doof Warrior, who's playing
That is amazing
electric guitar along with the drums of war, and it like at first you're like, this is insane, but then it makes sense when you think about you go back in history and like, oh, music has always been a huge part of warfare, so of course they would bring them out. And if like you have these car engines, what's the only thing that could possibly be louder than a car engine is a freaking electric guitar. And it has a flamethrower at the end. Why does it have a flamethrower? Because everything has to be multi-purpose out here. If you get attacked, like, hey, you got to defend yourself somehow. So I love that about the movie, is because no matter how weird it gets or how stylized or whatever, there's still a history and a reason behind everything, even if you don't quite know what it is. Like there's a lot of stuff in the movie, whether it's the War Boys spraying paint on them or Furiosa putting oil or on her forehead. You don't know what it means, but at the same time, you kind of trust the movie enough to know that it knows what it means, and that you might pick up on it later in another viewing or something like that, or you'll think about it and talk with people, and then come up with a reason for it. I kind of like that. It throws you in the deep end and expects you to kind of catch up. I feel like it's got to be a similar feeling to how when people saw the first Star Wars. Like we take for granted because we know everything about Star Wars now, but when they first saw the movie, there must have been so much that they were like, it's going by too fast. They're not explaining everything and whatever. And now you look at that movie and it's so, people will think it's slow or whatever, or that, oh, it's so easy to catch on to stuff. And I think that's kind of how this movie is, because it's so new. There are so many of these details that's like, oh my gosh, there's so much visual information that's coming at me. And that was a huge part of me going back to see it again, was just so I could process everything again,
I love how every single tribe you see in this movie, now you see quite a few tribes actually, or whatever you want to call them, groups of gangs out there, but each one has their own very specific look and style, and you feel like there's a deeply embedded history behind each one of them. You have obviously Immortan Joe, the main villain, and his war boys, and they're the ones that you get the most feeling for, where there's a huge history of heritage and raising children to be warriors, and their whole society is just focused on this. Everything about their cars, and the Doof Warrior, as you said, with his electric guitar flamethrower, urging them on to go on and fight. They get incredibly hyped. They're like the football team, the college football team of this world.
Yeah.
But then on top of that, you get hints of other little tribes throughout the movie. There's one tribe that's completely has all these spiked cars, and they come in. You barely even see any of the actual people. You just see their cars, and you get the idea of where they came from that, and where their focus is. You have a tribe of people on motorcycles, and they just throw grenades at you while jumping over you from these sand dunes and stuff. You feel like there's so much history ingrained in this movie that you want to see more of it. You want to spend some more time in here with each individual tribe. You want to see more movies where Max, goes visit this area or this area. So in
And
that way, it's a very visually engaging movie.
I think a huge part of that, because there's so many movies that are really visually engaging, but that don't last with you a long time. Like I like Avatar. Like I like Avatar more than most people, but I'll be the first to admit that it's more on a visual level than a story level. Even that being said, the visuals in Mad Max stand out way more than the ones in Avatar because I feel like in Avatar we kind of got to a place where like anything you can imagine you can do on screen, you have to do it through CG and stuff like that. And it's like, well, that's great and it can give you some awesome stuff, but with something like Mad Max, you're inherently limited by deciding to go practical with what you can do. And so when you see what they do in this movie, like I mean, 90% of this stuff they did for real. And it's funny because I remember the first time I saw it being like, oh yeah, there was tons of practical stuff and whatever, but I was like, oh, but there was definitely some CG in there. Second viewing though, with the exception of the sandstorm sequence, a lot of that stuff looks really real. Like I don't doubt that. Oh yeah, we had CG to take out the wires, or we composited shots, or we did this. It was more safe or whatever. But that doesn't really matter because it maintains the illusion of realism, which is something we so rarely get in movies these days. And even in movies when the CG is good, you kind of still have this disconnect from it where it's like you're not consciously thinking of it, but your mind knows that like, oh, there's a difference between, like Iron Man's flying around and that's his face, but maybe the body is CG. Like you somehow know there's a difference. Um, and yet in this, you look at the stuff and you're like, holy shit, I can't believe they did that. Or they're doing like it's insane, this movie. Yeah. This whole review is just gonna be hyperbole. I'm afraid.
It's a good movie when you can when you see a stunt happen and you can't tell whether it was a CGI person or an actual stuntman in that shot.
Here's the thing. The most impressive shots in this movie aren't even stunt shots. To me, it's like the camera's on a car driving alongside all the other cars, and they're like launching flamethrowers and all this other stuff. They're not even fighting yet. They're just like gearing up to go to battle, and you go, every one of those trucks is real. It's driving. Those are actual people on that stuff doing crazy stuff out in the middle of the desert. And just those were always the moments in the movie that got me the most excited. Was just like panning over the entire Immortan Joe war party. It was just like, this is insane. I can't believe like someone actually gave George Miller like $200 million to go into the desert and shoot this movie.
Maybe there is hope after all for action
Yeah.
movies.
And it's doing reasonably well enough that I think we might get a sequel. Hopefully, I mean we'll talk about the future of this franchise later, but yeah. So I think that's in broad strokes the movie. I don't know if you want to get. We haven't really talked about the story or the characters yet, so I don't know if you want to get a little more specific right now.
Let's talk about it specifically. Let's talk about a Max in this movie because we got Tom Hardy has come in. This is the first Mad Max movie where Mel Gibson hasn't played Max. Obviously, he's a little old for the role now. If they want to continue on with Max in his 20s and 30s, as he has been so far. So they cast Tom Hardy. When I initially heard about that, I was like, oh yeah, Tom Hardy, he's a great actor, whatever. And then we see him in the movie. So what are your thoughts on Tom Hardy first off before I go into it playing Max in this movie?
He's playing a very different kind of Max, which is a good thing. I think like going back to the whole James Bond thing, like you don't want. Like when you watch a Sean Connery James Bond movie, you want Sean Connery. When you watch a Roger Moore one, you want Roger Moore. When you watch Daniel Craig, you want what Daniel Craig's going to bring. And so with this one, I think Tom Hardy is playing his own version of Max. And I love it because he's still Mad Max, except the definition of mad has been changed. In the first three movies, I think the mad in Mad Max was kind of like, hey, this guy had his family killed. He's out for revenge. And, he's trying to like move on from that. The Max in this movie, though, I think by mad, they don't mean he's just like angry. I think they mean he's crazy. Because when we meet him in the beginning of the movie, he's like primal. Like he eats this two-headed lizard gecko thing that he finds in the middle of the desert. He gets, and then he gets captured, but then he makes his escape, and his escape, he's very violent. He's like a wild animal trying not to be caught. And that's kind of, slowly through the course of the movie, he kind of regains a bit of his humanity. But yeah, so I kind of love that. Like, I believe that this is the same character. Like, this is a different take on the character, but at the same time, I can believe that a bunch of shit happened to him in between this movie and the last one that would have caused him to get to this point. Like, it doesn't feel like an illogical progression for me.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I love Tom Hardy. A lot of people are complaining that, oh, he doesn't have a lot of dialogue, and when he does, he's muttering whatever. But it's kind of funny is, like, this whole movie reminds me of a western, especially like a Sergio Leone western, and so some of his like grumbling lines kind of remind me of how some of the dialogue is played out in those old spaghetti westerns. So I was perfectly fine with it.
Yeah. Well, for me, this comes down to pretty much my only complaint about the movie was Tom Hardy as Max. And I don't think it's quite for the same reasons that everyone else is saying. Everyone else is saying that they don't like how he doesn't have a whole lot of lines. He kind of mumbles through some of his lines. My issue is more with the fact that I don't think he gives a performance where you get an idea of who this guy is really at all. And they try to give him some sort of hint at a backstory with his with the flashback showing that he's been broken by not being able to save people time and again, and it's just kind of made him go crazy by this point, which I thought was great. I thought the first half of the movie was where he was the strongest because he didn't have anything to say, and you got an idea like, okay, this guy's just been broken by what he's seen over all the years. That's fine.
Yeah.
Second half of the movie is where I had more of a problem with him, in that he started finding himself again, and he starts becoming an actual human being and trying to help people. And in a way, he's becoming more of the Mad Max that we're used to seeing Mel Gibson play. In that he's a character that's out for himself, but he's not above going back to help people that really need him. The problem is that he's still playing it as this guy with just a kind of scowl on his face, and he does mumble through his lines, but it's not that he mumbles; it's that he sounds like he doesn't know what he wants to do with his voice. He's kind of gutturally, all right, we're gonna go this way, and then you're gonna go back and then do that and everything, and I felt like either Tom Hardy didn't know what kind of character he was supposed to be playing, or he didn't feel like he's getting the right kind of direction from George Miller, because I never really got the sense that I knew this character or even got a hint of who he was in the second half of the movie, even when he was doing more things.
Yeah,
but I'm totally okay with that.
I'll give you that he's nowhere near as charismatic as Mel Gibson. And George Miller, I think, was talking in an interview recently that before his death, they were talking with Heath Ledger about doing it. And it's like, oh, Heath Ledger, like, that's almost the perfect middle ground between Mel Gibson and Tom Hardy. And so I can see that. But when you're talking about the second half, I don't think I had as much a problem with this, because most of that second half, or the finale, or whatever you're referring to, is mostly action. And so it's more like, he's more engaged at that point in the movie, but then he's having to fight off all these guys. So really, I don't think it was as much of a distraction to me. Although that's something I'll try to pay attention to the next time or two I see it. Is more of his performance. Although one thing I liked about his performance too is how, and this is kind of a testament to Tom Hardy too, is that he's very much a physical actor. So he doesn't need a lot of that dialogue. He communicates a lot with just his face, and just like his exhaustion, and the different things he's feeling. So I like that character.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's why I think it's a very minor complaint of mine, because he isn't really the focus of the movie, and when he's doing action, he's great. I think Max works best in this movie when he's not talking, or when he doesn't have quieter moments. I think he works best when he is just in the action, in the moment, doing things, being physical, moving around. When he's just kind of glancing around at people, between people during the action scenes. I think he's strongest actually when he's strapped to that front of the car for the first half hour of the movie. I think I think he's at his best during those scenes.
I agree, and I don't know if it was because obviously I was at a much smaller theater, so the sound might have been as good, but he has some really funny lines when he's strapped to the front of that car, and it was like, oh, I wanted to see more of that, because there's the one part where the guy throws the spike and he's like, "That's my head," and then when he sees his car being driven, and he's like, "First they took my car, now my blood, now And then I think that's also when he's strapped to the front of the car is also the one time in the movie where he drops the F bomb.
Yeah,
I couldn't hear it, but I could read it on his lips that he, you know, dropped an expletive at that moment. And that was I'll give you that. There was a kind of humor in those moments that I wish had carried over. Maybe like to when he was strapped to the polecat. It would have been great if later in the movie if he was had just had a moment where he's like, if he had like a Hawkeye moment, in Avengers Age of Ultron where he's like, there's this going on, this going on, this going on. And I just got these arrows, But in this movie, it would have been like, oh, this happened to me, and now this. Yeah, I guess I could see if they had taken a little more of that kind of humor that he had strapped to the front of that car and like put it in the last third of the movie, it might have added a little more to his character. But yeah.
But again, I was totally okay with it because he isn't really even the main character of his movie. He's more of a side character that you view this world through. The main character of the movie really is Charlize Theron playing Furiosa. Actually,
yeah, she's so good in this movie.
She was so good in this movie, and again, it's a very physical performance. She has very few lines, but whereas I felt like Tom Hardy struggled with the lines he had, I felt like Charlize Theron really killed it with her lines. She was awesome.
Yeah, and I think she's another one too, where there's so much to her character that isn't explicitly told. Like you're never told how she loses her arm, or why she's seeking redemption, why like all this stuff. But you can like pick up little things. At least in my head, I've kind of come up with ideas of why she's seeking redemption and stuff like that. And I kind of don't want George Miller or someone to come out and be like, oh, this is what happened or whatever, because I kind of like some of the ideas I have in my head. They're not like earth shattering, like, oh my gosh, this makes the movie 10 times better, but it's just like little things that's like, oh, like there's this line she said here and then this, and in my head, like that kind of makes sense. So, I kind of like that they did that with her character, even though she's actually the one who has probably the most lines of dialogue in the movie, has the most to do, and is probably it would be interesting if they did like a screen time counter to see how much screen time she had compared to Tom Hardy. Even though they do share a lot of it together, it would just be interesting to see if she does wind up having more than he does.
Well, the thing is that a lot of people were talking about when they make another Mad Max movie about whether or not they want to bring back Furiosa and make more stories with her. I really don't think we should, because I think everything you know about her is just perfect as is. You don't need to know about how she lost her arm. You don't need to know about how or what her motivation is. You just need to know you need to know what she wants to do. You don't necessarily need to know why she does it, because so much about her is just given off through the way she delivers her lines. And I almost think that learning too much about her would ruin the illusion of the character. I think that we know enough about her. Move on to someone else's story in the next movie.
Yeah, and that's kind of what going back to what we said. That's what kind of makes Max's lack of character development, but kind of like him being he's relatively a rock solid character. Like you're going to get the similar thing from him every time out. That's what makes it so great though to have him be your constant, is because then it gives you an umbrella to tell different stories and feature different characters. Because it's like Furiosa is a great character. I don't really want to see more of her because I think like we've told her story, and I think she's got a mystery behind her that I don't want fully exposed. It's the same thing with like the Doof Warrior. Like the Doof Warrior is great. I don't want to see more of him though, because I think what's so great about him is those select moments that we see him just shredding on that guitar. So yeah, if we'll get into this conversation again later, but yeah, if they're able to do more Mad Max movies, I want to see different characters and different environments and tribes and whatever that he can encounter.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. Before we get into our spoiler conversation, just a couple other things I think we need to talk about. Just some technical aspects of the movie.
Oh yeah,
this soundtrack is freaking amazing.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, two tracks in particular, Blood Bag and Brothers in Arms, I've just been listening to on repeat. This is such a good soundtrack, especially because it's done by Junkie XL, who originally was a DJ. And I remember hearing that and being like, oh, so it's going to be like an electronic soundtrack. And then being so glad to be proven wrong because there's electronic stuff in there, and there's the great, obviously the Doof Warrior has electric guitar, so there's that on the soundtrack too. But it's also a very classical soundtrack at times. You know, it goes traditional at some points, and it goes back and forth, and it all works. And I think kind of gives the movie a fuller sound than if it was just a straight up electronic or a straight up orchestral soundtrack.
They use drums and the beat so well to just drive the action. It gets you pumped for the movie, quite literally.
Yeah.
You had a note about the frame rate on here.
Yes.
Do you want to talk more about that real quick?
So this was, I'm not too knowledgeable. I would have to, I would be interested to read some interviews with the editors and the cinematographer and stuff about this. But if you watch the movie, there are times when it's been, it looks like it's been undercranked, I think is the right terminology, but it looks like things are moving faster and it's kind of jittery and whatever. Especially in the beginning when Max is escaping. That's the moment I noticed it the most. And it's a technique that is used in the Road Warrior, at least. There are a couple of moments where the frame rate kind of speeds up or slows down or whatever. And I thought it was used really effectively here because I thought because it feels unnatural, it made certain parts of the movie feel more graphic or disturbing than they really were, or more unsettling. Like you would look at someone's face and, it would move, but it wouldn't be moving at what our minds register as the proper speed that a movie should be at. And so you'd be like, oh my gosh, what am I looking at? I don't know if it was something that you noticed, but it's something that I've noticed on both viewings. And initially, again, it goes back to how this movie's weird, but I think this is a technique that will throw a lot of people off, but I don't think is a bad technique. I think it's actually used really well, and I think it contributes a lot to kind of the madness and craziness of the movie.
Yeah, actually, it's a sort of thing that I wasn't conscious of when I was watching the movie. I think because they ingrain it into the style so well. But now that you mentioned it, I was thinking back on it, and I'm like, they did do that a lot. They just kind of worked it into the movie, so I wasn't noticing it, but it did really help with kind of getting across that disturbing aspect of the movie, which is really interesting. Especially considering that this movie is an R-rated film, not a PG-13 rated film. There's not really a whole lot that's actually graphic in here, though.
Yes. So here's my thing: is I turned to my brother after the screening, and I went, "If this is an R-rated movie, then the Dark Knight should be rated R." It's that kind of violent. Like if there was such a thing as a PG-15, this is the perfect example of a PG-15. Like it does enough stuff that's like graphic or disturbing that I'm sure we'll get into in the spoiler section, but it's like not. It's not like terrible. Like, there's no real nudity. There's no, real language that you can really pick up on. It's just kind of like violence. But even then, like a guy gets chainsawed, but you barely see it. It's like the camera moves by and it's at the edge of the frame when you see like blood kind of coming out and stuff. And other moments like that. So yeah, it was weird watching the movie. I would almost think that it was just maybe more R-rated because it's just constant, it's just intense for 2 hours straight, as opposed to kind of like giving you a lot of time to kind of whatever. But yeah, like looking at this movie, it's like, yeah, it wasn't, I didn't think it was really an R movie. I didn't think though PG, but then again, my whole thing about the rating system is that it's broken anyway. But but yeah, so I think the rating on this movie's a little, I think this and this weird in between those two ratings, and I think it just a lot of people, it came out with an R rating, but if this is what a PG-13 version of it would have looked like really anyway, I wouldn't have minded it being rated PG-13 then.
Yeah, well, it's along the same lines of I think there are some R-rated movies that don't deserve the R rating. For instance, the King's Speech one, technically, yeah, it has a bunch of F words in it. I don't think that movie deserves an R rating by any means, if you're just looking at it from a logical perspective. With this one, it's almost the same thing on the opposite end, in that, yes, I think technically this movie could have gone away with the PG-13. I think it works as an R-rated film though, because that way you'll be dissuading smaller kids from wanting to go see this movie because even though they even with a couple of trims, this movie could have been in PG-13 pretty
Yeah,
easily. I don't think it's a movie that kids need to go see.
I guess. Well, no, but I think if you had a kid who was 12 or 13 and up, like I guess my kind of problem with the rating system is that we call it PG-13, but it's really, I think at this point, PG-10, because I think whatever rating a movie is, take 3 years off, like
Yeah,
3 years below that, that's how old someone's going to be who's going to go to the movie. Like obviously a kid who's 14 or 15 isn't going to go to an R-rated movie by themselves, but they're still going to go to it.
oh yeah,
Just as like PG-13 movie, like it's PG-13 is for Marvel movies and Star Wars movies and whatnot. It's like those are movies that 10-year-old kids are going to see. Just like a PG movie, everyone's going to see PG. Like very few people are being dissuaded by PG rating, a real
yeah.
one. So
I don't know. It's interesting. The whole rating
I
system's
think if
broken.
anyone's worried about, yeah, exactly. Yeah, for some reason anyone's ever worried about content, I think like for this movie, I think if you had like a 13-year-old who was savvy enough of this kind of movie would be perfectly fine for it. There isn't any like scarring moment. It's kind of like if you watch the trailer and that seemed like something you were into, I think they would probably enjoy it.
Yeah, with a couple of briefly grotesque moments of graphic violence that is on the screen quick enough that it doesn't linger
Yeah.
on the screen, but it's still they still got some pretty disturbing stuff in there. So,
Yeah, yeah.
and then before our spoiler conversation, just one thing I want to talk about. You didn't see the movie in 3D, did you?
No, I saw it in 2D.
Okay, gotcha.
I was perfectly fine with that choice.
Okay, because I went to go see it in 3D, mainly because the time worked out better than anything else. To be honest, I actually really enjoyed the 3D in this movie. I think that's a movie that you can see fine in either format. You can watch it in 2D and just get everything out of it. You can watch it in 3D and get everything out of it. I did notice that this movie used depth a lot better than a lot of modern day 3D movies do. It's something for me on the same lines of Dread or Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, where I feel like the 3D in those movies, they know that's a 3D movie. They use depth of field really well, but if you're not watching it in 3D, it doesn't distract from it either. And there's also and there is a couple of gimmicky shots that are obviously meant to be in 3D. But even if you're watching it in 2D, it's still fine. So if you like 3D, if you are a fan of 3D, I would say check that out in 3D. If not, you don't lose anything by not seeing it in 3D either. It's a fantastic movie either way.
There was actually only one moment that I thought like, oh, that was a 3D moment, which was in as non-spoiler a way as possible. Basically, the final crash in the movie is the only thing that like was like, oh yeah, this movie was they wanted it to be in 3D.
Stuff flies out at the screen in slow motion, basically.
Yeah, although it's not, I don't think it's as distracting because the thing that does fly at you at the screen, it then does a fade. It does a fade to black. Off of it, so it acts more as a transition than a gimmicky. Like it's not like it flew at the screen and then flew back, and did something weird like that. So it didn't bother me in the 2D screening. I just kind of was like, oh, that's the 3D moment.
Yeah. Well, the most interesting thing to me, honestly, about the 3D in this movie is that it worked best when you have a car in the foreground and a car in the background, because then you could really get the sense of like the distance between the cars and everything. And I don't know, it was a really interesting stylistic choice because there are quite a few shots of just things with their relation to each other in the frame, and there are quite a few quick cuts, and so it might give you some headaches sometimes, but I felt like it worked really, really, really well for this movie. So I don't know. Anyways, anything else we want to talk about before we move into spoiler territory?
No, just kind of final thoughts. I think as of right now, this is my favorite movie of the year. It actually has me worried for The Force Awakens because I would have thought that would have been a shoe-in for my favorite movie of the year. And obviously, that movie still hasn't come out. Things could change. But as of right now, on my most anticipated list, Mad Max Fury Road was number 3. The only two movies that were above it were The Hateful Eight and The Force Awakens. If somehow both those movies are able to beat Mad Max at the end of the year, then this is going to be a really good year for movies.
Yeah, it is. I totally agree. It's It's interesting. This movie was my most anticipated movie of the year. So far, it's lived up to that. It is my favorite movie of the year so far. We still have a good chunk of the year left, though. We have more than half of the year to go. So we'll see. It's not my favorite of the Mad Max movies. It's my second favorite, I think. It's Road Warrior is still, I think is the kind of the purest form of action storytelling, where you get everything that you have in Fury Road from a plot standpoint, as in, like, the actions are fueled, or the plot and the character arcs are fueled by the action. But you also have the charismatic version of Max with Mel Gibson in that movie. I think he's a much more interesting character. That is not to knock Fury Road at all, though, because Fury Road is, just from a style standpoint, a much more enthralling movie than The Road Warrior is, and a much more engaging and intense film. So yeah, easily my favorite movie of the year so far.
Yeah, I'm gonna say this is my favorite Mad Max movie, and even just in terms of action movies, this is just, it's actually funny. Is I wouldn't even put it technically in the action. Like I have like two stacks of movies in my head. Like one is like greatest action movies, and you got like Raiders of the Lost Ark and Die Hard and stuff. But then I have this other pile that is like really crazy, really creative action movies, and it's like Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Man's Chest, the Lone Ranger movie that came out, just like these movies. And I know you didn't care for the Lone Ranger movie, but it's like these movies where those are all movies where the action is super crazy and inventive and creative, and so if I were marathoning movies like that, Mad Max Fury Road would definitely belong in that pile.
Awesome, cool. Okay, so I guess we can move on to our spoiler conversation.
Yeah.
Alrighty. So from here on out, Mad Max Fury Road spoilers. Just yeah, just go see it. It's awesome. Go see it on a big screen. Alrighty. So from here on out, talking about spoilers for Mad Max Fury Road. So yeah, Max dies. Not really. Max doesn't really die, but
He can't die.
he can't die. They need to make more movies with him.
There were a lot of times where he could have died, but he didn't die.
Yes.
Actually, that's one thing a lot of people bring up is the amount of blood he loses in the beginning should have killed him off already.
It was slow drip. But yeah, so I talked about how I didn't care for his portrayal in the second half of the movie, but they do at least try to give him more character in the second half of the movie. They give him more of an arc. He starts off the movie totally primal and sane, and then he finds his humanity by the end of the movie.
And I love there's a line that one of the five wives, who we haven't even mentioned yet, but are a great part of the movie, when Max decides he's going to help them, and he's like, "We have to go back to the Citadel." She's like, "I thought you said you weren't insane anymore." Just a great little moment there. And yeah, I kind of love how, Max has a line where he talks about, hope is a mistake, and how, if you try to fix the same thing over and over again, you're just going to go insane. And you kind of get the idea that he's talking about trying to save people. And yet, in the end, he's the one who winds up saving Furiosa with his own blood, which I kind of love how that's the thing this movie is great of, is it has a lot of setups and payoffs, especially in establishing like the technology and stuff like that. Like in the beginning, when Max gets captured, they use one of the boomstick things to blow up his car. And so one of these things can blow up a car. But then later when the spike cars come, oh, the boomstick works, but it's not enough to blow up this car. And it was just kind of cool how it went back and forth between that. And so it was nice how in the beginning of the movie they established that, oh, Max is a universal donor, and in the end, he's the one who's able to save Furiosa's life. There's been this trend in movies with using magic blood. I know Star Trek Into Darkness uses it, Amazing Spider-Man 2 uses it, and they're both kind of really terrible plot points. But this is the best use of magic blood because it's the universal donor. So it's like that's the only kind of magic blood I want to see in movies from now on.
That was the thing I was thinking about early on. I was like, well, how did they know what kind of blood type he has? Because I don't feel like they have sophisticated enough technology to really tell different kind of blood types. Like, oh yeah, he's a universal donor. You can go to anyone.
You don't trust the skills of the organic mechanic?
Not 100%.
This movie, we mentioned this earlier, but this movie has great names for its character. The organic mechanic, the doof warrior, Rictus Erectus.
Oh my gosh, that character, by the way, annoyed me so much. Like something about his face and his personality. I just wanted to punch him and just like
I
kick him off a
I
car.
I had a baby brother, and he was perfect, perfect
This
in every way.
this guy is like everyone else is going around in these badass they have these leather costumes on, these goggles and everything, and he has this goofy looking like skin colored leather mask that just looks weird, and he acts like a baby on top of that. He's like it's like he's been raised to be 3 years old his entire life, but he's this massive hulking guy.
Yeah. But yeah, so I love Max's arc in this movie. Um, I always find it interesting in movies like this where each movie is kind of standalone, how they take the character, and we already talked about that. But I think the character arc that surprised me the most was Nux, the war boy who's played by Nicholas Hoult. Mostly because I wasn't expecting. I don't know really what I was expecting with his character because Nicholas Hoult, he's not a. I wouldn't say he's like a marquee actor. Like you don't put his name up, and his name's not going to sell tickets. But he's an actor I recognize. So when you say like, oh, he's going to play one of the henchmen, it's like, oh, is he going to be like devious and scheming? Because we didn't get a lot of good looks at him in the trailer. So it was kind of cool to see how he has this uh, arc where I mean, depending on how you want to look at it, it's either his character is a stand-in for basically fanaticism and kind of how it changes. But at the same time, his character really doesn't change because the whole point of his existence is to live, die, and live again. And in the end of the only difference this time around being that he has a worthy cause.
Yeah, well, his character arc was interesting to me because I honestly when I watched the movie, I was trying to think back to what inciting incident could cause his change of heart, because he goes from really a fanatic person who believes wholeheartedly in this idea of, if I die in battle, I will go to Valhalla, and his almost religious fervor in Immortan Joe, the main villain, and he almost worships him basically. And he goes from that to being a character who will turn on Immortan Joe and do the right thing because it's the right thing to do, and because he cares about people other than just his kind of fanaticism, I guess. Whatever, I don't really know a better word to say it. But I was thinking, because I couldn't think of any single moment where that would have caused his change in heart, but it felt perfectly organic anyway, because he felt like this is where this character would naturally progress if he was surrounded by people who were a good example to him.
Immortan Joe is like, hey, you are worthy. If you do this, I'll carry you myself to Valhalla. They throw Nux on the truck. He's got the gun that he's supposed to shoot Furiosa, but then he trips and falls and drops the gun, and Immortan Joe calls him mediocre and then drives away. That's the moment. Is basically for Nux. It's basically the moment where God says, hey, you're so great, and then like 2 seconds later, it's like, yeah, you're not so great anymore. So see you later. And I think that's a huge thing. If you have this religion and this figure that you look up to, and you think I'm going to impress him, and then you literally trip and fall right in front of him, and then he's like, yeah, all right, I'll find someone else. I imagine that would do a lot when you put your faith in a person like that.
Actually, that's true. I hadn't really thought about that. That's really interesting. Yeah. His character, I was a little worried that he would become really annoying, but the way his arc works, he's really one of the more likable and more interesting characters in this whole movie, actually.
Yeah, and he has for lack of a better word, romance with one of the five wives that never felt forced, and never, I thought it was really well handled. It wasn't really a romance so much as it was just kind of a mutual affection. I feel like,
Yeah.
I think Sharon understood where he was coming from, and he grew to understand where they were coming from. Because they're both. I mean, this movie, I think, is a lot deeper than a lot of people are going to give it credit for, because it doesn't come out and say this is a movie about human trafficking and human objectification, or whatever you want to say. Because I mean, like, the five wives are sex slaves. They're not looked at as people, just in the same way the war boys aren't looked at as people. They're just fodder for Immortan Joe to use in his armies and stuff. And I think this whole movie is realizing, to an extent, about human worth and whatever. Because I mean, And there's that great, that line that they kind of repeat the five wives have, of we are not things, and I think that's kind of, that's the idea throughout the movie, is kind of rebelling against that establishment that keeps them in those positions where they can't be individual people.
Yeah. Yeah, it was great because it wasn't too on the nose, even though it was very obvious. Some of the themes that they were dealing with, you didn't feel like it was being a preachy movie. Just kind of like these are the elements we're using within our movie. As we're using elements of the sex slavery and that kind of stuff in the movie. This isn't a movie about that, though. It's not trying to be a social commentary on anything in particular.
Yeah, I feel like this is a movie that you can look into it however you want to and still get a good movie out of it. You can go in just being like, I just want to see a badass post-apocalyptic action movie, and you'll get that. Then you could say, hey, I want a little more substance with my action movie. And if you try to engage with what the movie's presenting, I think you can come out with something like that. So I think it works both ways.
Exactly. And then finally, one last thing I want to touch on is Furiosa. They tease that she's going to die towards the end of the movie. But then she doesn't. She survives and becomes the leader of this group of people, this tribe that Immortan Joe had originally led. And so it was nice to see her character kind of have a redemption of sorts, and she comes back, and she basically comes back to lead the people that she had tried to run away from in the first place. So that was nice.
Yeah, I actually really like that ending. I especially thought Mad Max's exit was probably the most appropriate. Like in all the movies, he always has his exit moment where he kind of walks away from the people that he's come to know and help throughout the movie. I thought this was almost the best visual representation of it, having him literally disappear into that giant crowd of people. And it just worked. You got the epic music and the huge crowd of people. It felt, what I loved about this movie is like each of the Mad Max movies kind of tackles a slightly different, different genre elements. Like there are different times where it feels like a Western, it feels like a biblical epic, it feels like a sci, all these kind of things. And that was a moment that made the movie feel larger than it was when they come back to the Citadel. And present Immortan Joe's dead and faceless body, which was a great moment in the theater. Like I love, I'm not a gore hound, but I love when you have those. I think a movie works better not if there's extreme graphic violence throughout, but if it's like punctuated by it. So if like at the end you just get that one moment and just seeing Immortan Joe's face get ripped off, like I was like, yeah, that was a satisfactory ending, to that character.
Yeah, and it wasn't over the top either. It happened. It was a grotesque moment, but they didn't linger on it or anything like that. Which I gotta give the movie props for that.
Yeah.
So.
Yep.
Yeah. So I mean, that's pretty much all I really got to say about the movie. I don't know if you have anything else, but it's a very, very satisfying, intense action movie.
Yeah, I think I feel bad for all the movies coming out over the next couple of weeks, because really all I'm gonna want to do until probably around the time Jurassic World comes out is just rewatch this movie. So
next week we're gonna talk about Mad Max Fury Road.
Yes.
All over again.
Next week what will we talk? Oh, Tomorrowland, I guess.
Tomorrowland.
Yeah, so that'll be interesting. I'm gonna try to see that one, even though early word of mouth isn't entirely positive, but it's a Brad Bird movie. I feel like I have to at least give it the benefit of the doubt.
So how bad could it be? The Brad Bird, exactly.
Yeah. So we'll see. But yeah, Mad Max, best movie of the year so far. I think it's safe to say, even if other better movies come out, it'll remain in that top 5, maybe even top 3. And especially like if there are movies better than this that come out later in the year, then man, this is gonna be a great year. So we win regardless,
Exactly. Check out this movie. I'm sure it'll be on my top 10 list at the end of the year. I have no doubt of that whatsoever, unless it's a phenomenally amazing year for movies. So check it out. Anyway, that about wraps us up. You can find us more episodes on the-letterbox.com. Check out our Film Illiterates web series. Our most recent episode was on The Road Warriors. If you want to hear mine and Alex's thoughts on that, you can go to our Film Illiterates YouTube page, or check us out on the-letterbox.com. Find us on Facebook with the Letterboxers, and Twitter. You can check us out on Film Illiterates as well. Take it easy.